Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into something pretty fundamental, I think, for the future of finance.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're looking at how the Treasury function, that core part of any company keeping things stable, how it's being completely reshaped by tokenization and, well, all things digital finance.
It's a huge shift that's already happening.
And we're drawing on some really interesting analysis today. Got some excerpts here from an article, Treasury Skills for a Tokenized Future.
Yeah, I've seen that one. It gets surprisingly specific, doesn't it?
It really does. Very granular.
Yeah.
So our mission today is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Let's unpack this, figure out what skills are genuinely essential now.
And going forward.
Exactly.
Right.
And see who might, maybe unexpectedly, be well-suited for this new world.
Right. Who's got a head start?
And just get our heads around how these, classic finance roles are changing. The big idea that keeps coming up in the source, finance is becoming code.
That's the core of it, yeah. Finance is becoming code.
Okay, so let's really dig into what that means practically. Because the source isn't just vague about needing tech skills, right?
No, not at all. It actually lists out, I think it was 10.
10, yeah. 10 specific crucial skill sets that it says Treasury pros need for this tokenized future. It's like a blueprint.
It really is. And they cover a lot of ground from, understanding the basic language to actually managing these new systems.
So first one on the list from the source, smart contract fluency. What does that actually mean for someone in Treasury? Is it just knowing the term?
No, it's much deeper than that. It's really getting past just the definition. You need to understand the actual logic,
Yeah.
The rules embedded in the code that control a financial instrument or a process.
Okay.
So think about debt terms or payment triggers. You need to be able to look at how they're written in the code itself, maybe in languages like Solidity,
Solidity, right.
and check if that code actually matches the legal agreement or the business intent. And the source really flags knowing how programmable compliance works.
Programmable compliance, like KYC triggers.
Exactly. KYC, whitelisting logic, figuring out who's allowed to even hold the token, having that stuff built right into the contract. It's like self-enforcing compliance.
Wow, okay. That's a big mental shift, understanding rules in the tech, not just in a policy doc somewhere.
Totally.
So building on that, what's the next kind of practical skill?
The source talks about blockchain workflow familiarity. This is more the hands-on side.
Right.
Like actually navigating the platforms people use for issuing tokens or managing these assets. The source mentions names like Securitize, Tokeny, Fireblocks, and it's also managing wallets, that the keys that control the assets, and using tools like block explorers.
Block explorers, like Etherscan?
Yeah, like Etherscan or Polygon Scan, depending. Tools you use to publicly track what the Treasury is doing, verify transactions right there on the chain.
So using the tech to actually see and manage the digital money flowing, what about analyzing risk and, liquidity for these new assets?
Yeah, that's another big one. On-chain liquidity and risk analysis. This is about moving beyond those static month-end reports.
Okay.
The source really emphasizes needing real-time dashboards, especially if you're dealing with tokenized assets or managing a stablecoin treasury.
Live data.
Exactly. And using DeFi analytics platforms, think Dune, Nansen, Glassnode to track where tokens are flowing, assess counterparty risk directly on the chain, and see liquidity patterns literally as they happen.
Instantaneously.
Right. And a really key part here, something easily missed, is understanding oracle dependencies.
Oracles.
Yeah.
How external data gets in.
Precisely how things like market prices get reliably fed into a smart contract. You need to understand the risks there, because if the price feed is wrong, it can completely mess up the contract's logic.
Okay, so risk analysis becomes this continuous live monitoring thing.
Pretty much.
And connecting all these new digital systems must be, well, another skill in itself.
Oh, absolutely. Number 4 is API and platform integration know-how.
APIs. The digital plumbing.
That's a great way to put it. You need to be able to maybe not build them yourself, but design or at least oversee how these new tokenized systems connect and talk to your existing setup, your ERP, your TMS, your accounting software.
Got it.
It's about managing automated workflows using these APIs. Things like automatically sweeping cash, calculating and paying interest, or maybe even triggering FX hedges based on live data feeds.
Okay, so APIs are key connectors. And compliance We touched on it with smart contracts, but does it get its own focus?
It does. Digital compliance operations. This is about actually doing KYC/ML processes on chain, maybe using platform plugins or specific compliance oracles.
Right.
It's really understanding how those rules, like blocking certain jurisdictions or checking investor eligibility, are coded in and automatically enforced, and then operating within that coded framework.
So compliance is code, not just with code. Okay, we're halfway through the sources list. What's number 6?
Data modeling and simulation. The source highlights needing to model these new tokenized instruments, maybe using tools like Python, SQL, or Power BI.
Why model them?
So you can run simulations. Test how a smart contract product, like a callable bond or one of those perpetual liquidity pools, would actually behave under different market conditions. Or stress test your funding strategies if they involve tokens or digital collateral.
Applying serious analytics to these new, sometimes complex structures.
Exactly.
And then actually designing them in the first place.
Yeah, that leads to number 7, Treasury product structuring in code. This really needs close teamwork.
Between who?
Between the Treasury folks who know the finance, the legal experts who know the regulations, and the engineers who actually write the code. It's about translating complex financial features, amortization schedules, call options, debt covenants, into smart contract logic that works reliably and securely on a blockchain.
Translating finance needs into tech specs. Makes sense. And keeping it all safe. That must be huge.
Absolutely critical. Number 8 is cybersecurity awareness. This covers a lot. Managing wallet permissions, who gets to approve what. Setting up strong multi-sig controls where you need multiple keys for a transaction. Using cold storage, keeping keys offline. Evaluating the security risks of different DeFi protocols you might interact with. Preventing hacks. Just generally understanding the unique threats in the on-chain world. The whole security model is different.
Yeah, the digital world brings a whole new set of vulnerabilities.
Okay.
2 more left on the list.
Yep. Number 9 is interoperability and network awareness. You need to see the bigger picture, the whole digital asset ecosystem.
Meaning?
Knowing about different blockchains, like why choose Ethereum versus Avalanche? Or maybe a private chain like Corda, understanding how bridges between chains work. Knowing where the best stablecoin liquidity is, just grasping the different paths that digital capital can flow through.
So it's not just mastering one little silo, but understanding the whole interconnected map.
Exactly. And the final one, number 10, ties it all together.
Which is?
Decision-making with real-time data. The source is very blunt here. Static spreadsheets are basically obsolete for this stuff. It's about using those live dynamic dashboards we talked about, fed by on-chain data, connected via APIs to make quick, informed decisions on cash allocation, on the best timing for issuing debt, on your FX hedging strategy, all based on instant, verifiable data.
That is a really comprehensive list. It connects everything from understanding the code itself to real-time operations to making strategic calls.
It does.
Which brings up a really interesting question that the source tackles. Who, right now, might already be well-positioned to step into these kinds of roles? It points to some specific tech backgrounds.
Right. The article makes a good point that skills developed in certain tech jobs translate really well to what tokenized Treasury needs. You might already have a leg up.
Like who? Which types of professionals?
Well, folks like API integration engineers or fintech product developers, they already spend their days connecting systems with APIs, managing real-time data. That's perfect for plugging tokenized platforms into existing Treasury setups.
Yeah, they get the integration challenge. What role could they move into?
The source suggests something like a tokenized Treasury integration architect.
Okay. What about people who work with data?
Definitely. Data analysts or BI developers, especially if they know languages like Python or SQL, they build dashboards, create models, run analytics, ideal for simulating tokenized funding or stress testing digital collateral.
So a natural fit for what kind of role?
Maybe a digital risk and ALM analyst, asset and liability management.
Makes sense. And the people actually building the blockchains.
Obvious candidates, right. Blockchain developers, especially with smart contract experience like in Solidity, they're already experts at coding digital assets. They could structure programmable Treasury instruments.
Becoming something like a tokenized debt engineer.
Exactly.
And security. We talked about the risks.
Crucial. Cybersecurity analysts or DevSecOps people. They understand digital security, access control, encryption, finding vulnerabilities totally essential for designing secure wallet setups or handling incidents with tokenized assets.
Needed for a role like Treasury Security Officer. What about people already in the broader crypto world? DeFi users, perhaps?
Absolutely. Web3 or DeFi operations professionals. They're already used to on-chain tools, managing wallets, interacting with protocols, understanding liquidity in decentralized markets. Perfect for hands-on roles.
Like a digital treasury operator.
Yep, running the day-to-day digital operations.
And consultants who already advise treasury departments.
Good point. Treasury tech consultants are people who implement ERP or TMS systems. They know the existing workflows, the pain points. They understand how tech fits into traditional finance.
So they could lead the change?
Yeah, maybe as a digital treasury transformation lead, helping bridge the old and new.
The source even mentioned automation specialists.
It did. AI and RPA workflow designers, robotic process automation. Their skill is automating rule-based tasks. That fits perfectly with the automated instant settlement world of digital assets. They could help design AI-powered treasury processes.
Okay, so even though that list of 10 skills sounds daunting, there are clearly tech roles where people have already built a strong foundation.
Definitely.
What about the people currently in traditional treasury roles? This is a big implication. The source is pretty direct, isn't it? It says they basically have to pivot towards tech fluency.
It doesn't pull any punches, no. It frames this shift not just as a nice-to-have upgrade, but as strategically vital for staying relevant, for leading in the future of finance.
And why? What's the driving force behind that urgency?
Well, the main reason, like we said at the start, is that finance is fundamentally becoming code.
Right.
Core treasury jobs, issuing debt, making payments, managing collateral. They're increasingly run by smart contracts, by automated platforms. If you don't grasp the underlying code or system logic, how can you effectively oversee it, fix it when it breaks, or make it better?
You're managing a black box otherwise.
Exactly. The source draws a contrast. The old way was, know how to do the transaction manually. The new way is, know how the system does the transaction itself, and crucially, how you can influence its rules or parameters.
That's a massive change in perspective.
It really is. And second, the source says tech now shapes treasury strategy. These APIs, digital platforms, blockchains, they're not just IT background noise anymore.
Wow.
They're becoming front office tools. They define how you raise money, how you manage it, how you move it. So, treasury pros who get tech savvy can actually own this digital shift, guide the strategy, instead of just reacting when IT implements something new.
They move from being passive users to active architects.
Perfectly put. And the third point the source makes is pretty stark.
Which is?
Being tech illiterate is a significant career risk. As tokenization, AI, DeFi tools get woven into corporate finance, if you don't have a working grasp of the tech, you risk being sidelined from the important strategic conversations. You could become less relevant.
Ooh.
The source basically argues that future treasury leaders will be those who deeply understand both the capital markets and the digital plumbing underneath.
That's a compelling case for taking action. But how? How can current treasury folks make this pivot without totally ditching their finance careers? This is where it gets really practical, right? The source talks about becoming finance x-tech hybrids.
Yes, that's the key idea. It's not about suddenly becoming a hardcore coder overnight. It's about building specific, targeted tech skills within your finance expertise, finding that sweet spot right at the intersection.
And the source gives actual examples of these hybrid skill areas and the jobs they could lead to.
It does. For instance, combining smart contracts plus product logic. That means learning the basics of how contracts work, understanding common token standards, ERC 3643, ERC 20, and figuring out how things like coupon payments or redemption rules get coded.
And where does that skill lead?
Potentially to a role like a tokenized debt structuring lead, someone who designs these new instruments.
Okay, understanding how finance concepts get automated. What about connecting systems?
Focusing on APIs plus automation. Really understanding how REST APIs work. How you can use them to link your traditional treasury tools or bank connections to these new digital asset platforms.
Preparing you for.
Roles like a treasury API integration manager, the person orchestrating those data and transaction flows.
And using all that real-time data we talked about.
That's mastering on-chain analytics, learning to really use block explorers, digging into public data on platforms like Dune, building those live dashboards to track digital assets or transaction flows.
Vital for.
A digital liquidity analyst role.
Right. Getting comfortable actually using the new digital environment.
Exactly. Platform operations, learning how to operate the new tools. Fireblocks, Tokeny, Securitize, understanding digital wallets, different ways to hold keys like cold storage, managing user permissions. That points towards being a digital treasury operator.
And the security and compliance tech angle.
That's cyber and compliance tech, understanding wallet security, setting up controls, seeing how KYCML checks or jurisdiction rules are automated and enforced on the chain. Essential for someone like a smart contract risk and compliance analyst.
And the source emphasizes this isn't about quitting finance for IT, right?
No, definitely not. It's about building this tech muscle inside the Treasury function. How? Maybe shadowing tech teams, taking specific courses online, but most importantly, getting your hands dirty.
Like joining pilot projects.
Exactly. The source really pushes joining tokenization pilots, working on projects with stablecoin treasuries, or dealing with on-chain fund flows. That's how you embed yourself and learn practically in these hybrid roles.
That feels like a very doable path. The source then zooms in on one specific transition example, the debt syndicator or primary market placement specialist. How could someone in that very traditional role make this leap?
Yeah, this is presented as a kind of case study because it shows how you leverage your existing strengths, market knowledge, deal structuring, while strategically adding the tech piece.
So where does that person start? What are their strengths now?
The starting point is their current job. The strengths are deep. Understanding how to structure a deal, knowing what investors want, navigating compliance, handling KYC, managing mountains of documents, allocating bonds. They've got that market feel, that network.
They know how to get deals done the old way, basically. Lots of manual effort, lots of relationships.
Right.
So how do they build the tech muscle from there?
The source lays out the idea of a deliberate bridge role, maybe for 2 or 3 years.
What kind of role?
Things like being a business analyst, maybe in a fintech or treasury tech team, or a digital issuance product analyst, focusing specifically on how these new platforms work. Even an IT project manager overseeing a treasury or tokenization system implementation could work.
And why are those roles good bridges? What makes them effective?
Because they force you to be the translator between the finance world and the tech world. You're working side by side with tech teams, really understanding how platforms like Tokeny or Fireblocks or Securitize operate, but at a workflow level. You're helping engineers digitize the issuance process, translating complex finance terms, and steps into logical sequences that can be coded or run through APIs. You learn how to write requirements, read technical specs, help with documentation, understand system design. You gain vital tech understanding without having to become a programmer yourself.
So you become the person who understands both sides and can manage projects at that intersection.
Precisely. You're the finance expert in the tech room and the tech-savvy person in the finance room.
What specific skills does the source say someone picks up during this bridge phase?
They'd get real experience with digital issuance workflows, seeing smart contracts, whitelisting, compliance triggers from the inside. They'd learn agile and product development methods, how tech actually gets built, user stories, sprints. They'd get familiar with API integrations, seeing how systems connect. They'd understand on-chain logic by seeing financial rules turned into code. And they'd get comfortable with platform operations, wallets, custody, automated compliance within these systems.
That sounds like a really solid, practical grounding in the tech side. Where does that lead after the bridge role?
The future destination roles are pretty exciting, right at the forefront of this shift. You could become a digital syndication lead, designing and running automated on-chain bond deals, or a tokenized capital markets product manager owning the platform itself. Maybe a smart contract structuring specialist, focusing on translating complex debt into secure code alongside engineers, or even a broader treasury tech strategist, advising the whole company on using stablecoins, tokenized assets, or DeFi.
The source also mentioned an alternative path for people in big companies.
Yeah, an internal rotation. If you're in a large bank or corporation moving into their dedicated digital assets group, or the treasury technology team, or maybe a DLT blockchain innovation unit, can be a fantastic bridge. You learn the skills while using your existing network and reputation inside the firm.
So why is this debt syndicator path highlighted as such a good example?
The source argues it's ideal because you keep your incredibly valuable market knowledge and deal structuring skills, your finance edge, but you strategically add the tech fluency. That mix creates this rare hybrid profile.
Someone who gets both traditional capital markets and the new digital infrastructure.
Exactly. And that makes you incredibly valuable, maybe even indispensable, as firms move towards tokenized markets.
That really clarifies how an individual might navigate this change. Now, building on that, it's fascinating how tokenization doesn't just give the debt syndicator new tools. The source says it fundamentally changes the job itself.
Yeah, it's a real transformation of the role's function, not just swapping spreadsheets for software. Think about the traditional role before tokenization. The placement manager was the central hub,
Right.
coordinating everything, book building, price guidance, allocations mainly through phone calls, emails, maybe Bloomberg terminals, Excel sheets. Personal trust and relationships were absolutely key to making deals happen smoothly.
A very human-intensive, high-touch manual process.
Yep.
So how does tokenization change all that? The source compares specific processes, right?
It does. Take investor onboarding. Traditionally, that was manual KYC, chasing documents. With tokenization, it can be largely automated using whitelisted smart contracts and digital ID solutions.
Huge time saver, less paperwork. What about allocating the deal?
Deal allocation used to be complex negotiation, lots of back and forth, managing lists and spreadsheets. With tokenization, it can be handled by pre-programmed on-chain logic. Rules executing allocations automatically and instantly based on set criteria.
And settlement, that's always been a slow point.
Massive change there. Settlement was usually T+2, trade date plus 2 days, involving custodians, clearinghouses. Tokenization allows for T+0 atomic settlement, meaning the asset and the payment swap hands at the exact same time, often using stablecoins or maybe, down the line, CBDCs.
Instant settlement, wow. And compliance checks.
They shift too. From being mainly human legal reviews to auto-enforced compliance built into the smart contract, with humans monitoring and overseeing, of course.
And reaching investors, does that change?
Potentially, yes. From manually curated investor lists to global 247 programmable distribution enabled by the tech, while still sticking to those built-in compliance rules about who's eligible where.
So a lot of the manual grunt work, the process management, gets automated. What does the source say gets reduced or eliminated in this new model?
Well, especially for more standard types of bonds, the source points out that the need for constant personal coordination drops significantly. You might not need to call dozens of fund managers for a simple, plain vanilla bond if eligible investors can just interact directly and compliantly with a digital platform.
So less reliance on individual outreach for routine deals.
Exactly. And email-based pricing and allocation haggling becomes less critical if the platform can enforce pricing rules, manage different tranches, and automate the allocation fairly based on the set logic. And for cross-border deals, the direct digital access can often cut out the need for Redis middlemen or intermediaries.
Right. So if that whole execution layer gets heavily automated, what's left for humans to do? The source is clear. The human element doesn't just vanish, right? It shifts.
Precisely. It moves up the value chain. Strategic investor relationship management is still absolutely vital, especially for complex deals, large deals, where trust, signaling commitment, negotiating bespoke terms that's still very human. The role just shifts from managing the execution details of the relationship, like chasing for allocation numbers, to focusing on the strategy of the relationship and orchestrating the digital process.
So less manual doing, more strategic thinking and oversight.
Yes, and structured deal engineering. Designing complex tokenized bonds, maybe with multiple layers, special call features, or terms linked to ESG targets that still requires sophisticated human financial creativity and market knowledge, even if the back-end settlement is digital.
And dealing with the really big investors.
Large anchor investor negotiation. That still needs senior human interaction. A major pension fund wanting specific terms or a huge slice of the deal isn't going to negotiate with an algorithm. That's still a high-level human-to-human discussion, even if the final deal settles on tokenized rails.
Okay, so summing up the net impact on the role, the source sees it as a pretty dramatic shift.
Yeah, the source has this useful comparison. Deal execution goes from manual coordination to being platform-driven, code-led, relationship management, shifts from being partly operational, partly strategic, to being almost purely strategic.
Got it.
Compliance coordination moves from human process wrangling to being code-driven and monitored by humans. Investor access control changes from manual gatekeeping to on-chain programmable whitelisting.
Yeah.
And pricing and allocation evolves from negotiation case by case to being more rules-based or maybe even done via on-chain auctions.
That really changes the required skills and where you focus your time. And it leads to that crucial follow-up. If execution is automated, where do the human relationships matter most now?
That's where the source brings in this idea that the relationship layer moves up the stack.
Moves up the stack, meaning the important relationships now happen higher up in the organizations.
Exactly. It shifts away from the mid-level debt syndicator having those day-to-day transactional chats with individual fund managers. The critical relationships now happen at the senior decision-maker level.
Quite between.
The CFOs who are issuing the debt, the Treasury heads managing the company's cash, the chief investment officers, CIOs at the big funds deciding where to put capital, or the lead partners at investment firms. Those top-level connections become paramount.
And why does the source say this shift occurs? What drives it?
A few key reasons. First, standardized bonds need no sales pitch. If a tokenized bond is simple, compliant, and digitally accessible, it doesn't need a personal sales relationship for wide distribution. Eligibility and easy digital onboarding become the main factors.
The access is built in, not based on who you know for the simple stuff.
Right. Second, anchor investors want strategic access. The really big players still want influence-preferred pricing, maybe input on the bond structure, alignment on things like ESG. Those are high-level strategic talks that happen between the senior execs, the CFO, and the CIO, not between the mid-level person handling the mechanics.
So the relationship becomes about strategic partnership, not just getting allocation.
Exactly. And third, the source suggests something interesting. Relationship, trust in code. In this digital world, when automated contracts and transparent platforms handle the execution fairly, investor trust starts to shift. They might trust the audited code, the secure platform, more than they trust a single person to allocate fairly. So the senior human relationships become about building strategic assurance in the system and the counterparty's credibility, rather than managing the manual execution trust.
That's a fascinating point about where trust resides now. So the summary here is pretty key.
It really is. Human interaction doesn't vanish, it evolves. Execution gets automated and efficient. But the vital work building trust, aligning strategy, structuring complex deals that stays human, it just happens at a more strategic, senior level.
Yeah, which brings us right back to that pivot needed for mid-level professionals.
Absolutely. Their core value proposition has to change. It's less about, I know the right fund manager to call to place this bond, and more about, I understand how to structure and digitally syndicate a compliant on-chain offering that reaches the right digital capital pools, and I can talk strategy about it with senior leaders.
It's a fundamental change in where they add value and how their careers need to evolve. And the source wraps this up with a really powerful quote, doesn't it?
It does. It really captures the essence. It says, tokenization automates the pipes, not the people. It cuts down the human coordination needed for manual tasks, the paperwork, the chasing, the reconciling, but it doesn't replace human judgment, strategic insight, or those crucial senior relationships. The job shifts away from manual processing towards designing smart deals, orchestrating digital platforms, building strategic networks, and using expert judgment on new digital challenges.
That quote really nails it. The future of Treasury, based on this analysis, is just deeply tied to tech, to code, to platforms. Being successful isn't just about being a great finance mind anymore.
No, it's about being that hybrid. Someone who can bridge the world of capital markets with the world of code logic.
And this isn't just for news tech firms, is it? This seems relevant for almost any company dealing with capital, debt, or even just managing cash in this increasingly digital world.
Absolutely. Any firm interacting with markets or managing significant cash flow needs to understand these shifts. It's becoming fundamental.
And it leaves us with a really provocative final thought, drawn from the source's conclusion. It suggests the most valuable Treasury pros in, say, 2030 won't just get the financial goal why you need capital or liquidity.
Right.
They'll also understand how the smart contract, or the API, actually makes it happen, how the data moves, how the digital plumbing works. The source basically presents this move towards tech fluency, becoming that hybrid, not just as good career advice, but as strategic survival.
Strategic survival, that's a strong way to put it.
It really is. So what does that mean for your path forward?